The Houston Texans make a huge move and acquire wide receiver Stefon Diggs. Are they now Super Bowl contenders? We'll answer that question and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL. Let's roll.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to a Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tyler Rowland, here with my co-host, Michelle Madjuk. Huge trade. Stefon Diggs to the Houston Texans. We're going to talk about how this changes the Texans season, how this changes things in Buffalo. Look at the fantasy football impact of this move as well. Before we get into today's show, though, do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. I mean, a blockbuster move on a Wednesday. We're diving into it. Thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed for Monday through Friday, year-round NFL content, always for free. My regular co-host, Alex Clancy, is out. He is not feeling well. Alex, I hope you feel better. But in his place, we have an excellent stand-in and Michelle Madjuk, who is one of the hosts for Locked On Fantasy Football and then a researcher for NFL Network, one of the best in the biz. So very excited to have you on, Michelle, to break this move down. I guess right out of the gate, instant thoughts from the Texans side of things. How are you seeing this for Houston, and does this make them a Super Bowl contender?
So I'll give you the positive note first. They've upgraded the season at two positions, right? They went from Devin Singletary to Joe Mixon at running back, and they've gone from now Robert Woods to Stefon Diggs because they still have Nico Collins and Tank Dell there. So this is just a great skill set group for the Texans. Now, I will say, from what we've heard with Stefon Diggs, he has some issues when he's not targeted enough, or he doesn't feel like he's enough in the game plan. So I just brought up all the skill players they have there, especially at wide receiver.
Absolutely.
If he's not going to get 160 to 180 targets, which he's used to with the Bills, and he was already upset with not being utilized enough there, how is he going to feel with the Texans splitting up his time? And where is he going to be mentally there? And how is this locker room going to handle that?
No, I think you're 100% right. I think you look at the collection of talent. Like, if we're just on Madden scrolling through the roster, you're like, whoa, that's a great group. Like, we didn't even mention like Dalton Schultz in there as well. And of course, not a skill position player, but Laramie Tunsil, maybe the best left tackle in the NFL. So there is no doubt that the talent is there, but I'm with you in having those wonders. And I know that, people in the comments or listening are going to be like, oh, that's the Titans guy. Of course, he's skeptical of the Texans making a big move. And you're fair. I'm not going to deny that there may be a little personal bias there, but at the same time, you're not a Tennessee Titans person. You're not affiliated with the AFC South in any tremendous way. And you point out those concerns. You look at Stefon Diggs, like you mentioned, 150 targets every single year, or more than that, 160 in some years for the last 4 years. The Buffalo Bills have been one of the most successful teams in the NFL, winning-wise, making deep playoff runs, having a chance at a Super Bowl, all of that. And in most cases, and a lot of times, Stefon Diggs was still not happy, and he was acting out on the sideline. And I have to say, as someone who covers the Tennessee Titans and is admittedly a Tennessee Titans fan, I had to bring that up on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it nowadays. It's always Twitter for me. But how is a man who is getting that much work and winning that much going to be happy going to a situation where, I like CJ Stroud a lot, but CJ Stroud is not as good of a quarterback as Josh Allen. He's not as good of a player. Maybe he gets there eventually, but he's not right now. So I just don't know how the fit is. DeMeco Ryans, very strong coach, has a very good pool in the locker room. That might help deal with it a little bit, but I wouldn't look at CJ Stroud as some commanding personality or anything like that who's going to, stop it, we're winning, quit. So I do have those concerns as well. Now, on the positive side, I will say that having that trio of guys is just excellent on the outside. But again, not only are we bringing up these concerns with Diggs, but I personally think that Nico Collins is a better football player than Stefon Diggs. right now. And maybe we can get into some of the concerns with Stefon Diggs as a player, not just, hey, he's going to get mad about targets, but there are concerns with him as a player in general. He's going to be 31 years old. The back half of the season, maybe we talk about that more when we touch on the Buffalo stuff, but I know that Stefon Diggs is a name brand, and he's been one of the best receivers in the NFL for a long time. But as you point out, and as I'm pointing out, I don't think this is like the major home run that people are acting like it is, even if that group of talent is good.
Yeah, it's not just the character concerns, right, with Diggs. It's also with what we've seen the last 2 seasons in the second half of the year. He's had a major fall off now, 2 consecutive seasons. Now, you can give him excuses all you want, right? 2 years ago, it was a Josh Allen elbow injury. Last year, they changed offensive coordinators. Maybe that was the issue. But weeks 1 through 6 last year, he was one of the best wide receivers in the league, like he typically is, right? Was on fire, averaging over 103 receiving yards per game. His catch percentage was up at 74%. And then from week 7 through the divisional round, his catch percentage dropped from 74 to 61. That is 13% drop off. His receiving yards per game dropped to 48.9 receiving yards per game. That's week 7 through the divisional round. That's a massive chunk of the season. That's pretty much the entire season. And his receptions per game went down by 3 per game. So we saw a massive, massive decline from him last year. Is that due to age? Was it just due to, the struggling Bills offense and then the change of offensive coordinator? We're not sure, right? But we don't know if the Texans are getting this top 5 wide receiver in the league or if they're just getting an aging, struggling wide receiver.
Yeah, and to add on to some of those statistics that you brought up, you look at the season in totality, it was a bottom 3 year for Stefon Diggs in yards per reception, yards per target, catch percentage. So while he did fall off at the end of the year, just the totality of the season wasn't as productive because, again, he's getting older, and you see that his success is really coming against zone coverage. He's doing really well against zone coverage. But that's one of the things with aging wide receivers. You start to struggle with that press coverage at the line of scrimmage. You start to struggle against man coverage when it's just one-on-one because that requires more athleticism and more, burst and electricity, where zone, you can rely more on your nuance, your savvy, your understanding of coverages. So as a person who covers the Titans with DeAndre Hopkins, you see similar things. He struggles with the press, better against zone, stuff like that. So I definitely think that is a real concern. And we don't mean to poo-poo Texans fans who are probably really, really happy right now, but there are definitely concerns there. And we'll talk about the Buffalo side of things. Buffalo making this move raises some flags as well. You have to look at why would Buffalo make this move? And when you start thinking about it from that vantage point, it definitely becomes something where you don't have to be over the moon entirely, and you can have these concerns. What I do want to say before we move on to the Buffalo side is do want to at least talk about the trade terms here. Buffalo will get a 2nd-round pick in 2025, which came from the Vikings to the Houston Texans. So Buffalo will get that pick from the Texans, 2025 second. And then the Texans, while getting Stefon Diggs, will also get a 5th-round pick and a 6th-round pick in 2025. So those are the trade terms. Overall, I think some people are shocked by what they're giving up. But again, you look deeper into Stefon Diggs as a player, and I think it makes more sense why the trade capital was what it was. But Buffalo obviously is in the middle of a major reset. So we're going to talk about why Buffalo would make this move, where they go from here. And then, of course, Michelle is one of the best fantasy football analysts in the NFL environment. I'll say we're gonna leverage that fantasy football knowledge at the end of the show. So a lot to come before we get into it, though. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the start date of your 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Football fans, let's continue this Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Major NFL news. Stefon Diggs traded to the Houston Texans for a second-round pick in 2025 and then a fifth and a sixth going back to Houston in 2025. We talked about the Texans angle of this. Now I want to kind of dive into the Buffalo angle of this. And Michelle, I'll kick us off here. Buffalo is going to be eating a $31 million dead cap hit. I think I saw before coming on that is the highest dead cap of any wide receiver ever. And you wonder, maybe if Buffalo was a rebuilding team, they weren't a contender. They're like, hey, like with Russell Wilson and the Broncos, they're like, hey, we're going to have an insane dead cap number, but let's just take our medicine right now. We're not in contention. We'll eat that money. We'll admit our mistake. We'll move on and clear our books for the future. Buffalo is not in Denver's situation. Buffalo should be going all out for a Super Bowl in Josh Allen's prime nonstop. So to take away his number one wide receiver, eat that dead cap money when they need to be contending, and then trade away Diggs for what they got back, everybody's like, yeah, Buffalo got fleeced. This is But like we were mentioning earlier, I think Buffalo only does that if they know something. We see the decline at the back half of the season, which you not only explained, but put the data to it as well to explain the sideline outburst, the constant malcontent that we had to deal with Stefon Diggs in Buffalo. I guess I think it's fair to look at this trade and be like, hey, Buffalo may be getting off a depreciating asset and an issue in the locker room before everybody else realizes just how bad it is. So I'm willing to give Buffalo, some Buffalo fans are freaking out. I think Buffalo may be making a shrewd move in a year where the wide receiver draft class is excellent. So if you're Buffalo, getting pick 60, getting pick 28, maybe you put those together, you move up into the mid-teens, you get a Brian Thomas Jr., you get an Adonai Mitchell, you get a Xavier Worthy. I just don't think that this is the massive failure for Buffalo or some swindling of Buffalo that maybe some people are acting like.
No, I don't think it's a massive failure. It does seem like probably Stefon Diggs really, really wanted out, right? Or else I don't know why they would do this. This feels like a lighter situation to Antonio Brown when he wanted out with the Steelers, right? Antonio Brown was still at the top of his game at this point, even much better than Stefon Diggs, I feel like, at this point. Right. And, he wanted out, so all the Steelers could get for him was a third-round pick because he was also expensive. Like, Diggs being, his contract he has and clearly teams wanting to know the Bills want to get rid of him. Like, that's going to lower his trade value. I'm actually shocked they even got a second rounder for him. I'm saying good job there. Now, I do think, like I brought up Diggs' stats and how he's declined a bit. I still do think there's some juice in there. So I do think this is a loss for Josh Allen, and especially considering they got rid of Gabe Davis this offseason as well because he left in free agency to sign with the Jaguars. So Diggs and Gabe Davis are the only Bills players with 1,000+ receiving yards over the last 2 years, including the playoffs. And then also those two have accounted for 70 of Josh Allen's 158 passing touchdowns since 2020, including the playoffs. That's 44% of Josh Allen's passing touchdowns that just Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis made up. That's a little scary now because who is his wide receiver one? Is it Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel? Like, those aren't wide receiver one guys. Maybe they lean more on the tight end being the top target like they see with the Chiefs, with Travis Kelce. They can use Dalton Kincaid like that. But now they can't even really go trade for a veteran wide receiver because they still owe so much to Diggs this year. Maybe they trade for Ayuk or something like that and figure out his contract. But it is looking a little scary for the Bills in terms of who Josh Allen will be targeting this year.
Yeah, no, and I think along with Brandon Ayuk, I think a name like T. Higgins has to be in the conversation.
Would the Bengals trade him, though, to the Bills?
I mean, that's tough, but I mean, with Dave Mugliata as his agent, who's historically tough to deal with, and especially with the Bengals, that's Jesse Bates' agent too. I understand that, but if T. Higgins wants the big deal and the Bengals aren't going to pay him and they can get pick 60 for T. Higgins, maybe they would consider it. But you make a good point. That might be a little too close to home for the Bengals to do. I think it's obvious that the Bills have to go out and draft a wide receiver, even if they make one of those trades for one of those guys. This is a perfect time to do it. So I think they're primed and ready to do that, especially at pick number 28. I think you just have to wonder, how we talk about trades and people say it's a win-win, it's a lose-lose. This is a meh trade to me. Like Buffalo has lost so much this offseason. We were worried about their defense. They lost both their safeties. Tre'Davious White is now out. Like Von Miller obviously is not going to be someone who they're going to get the most out of what they expected. So Buffalo just seems like they're in a transition year to me. So while this move, maybe they're getting off of a depreciating asset before everybody kind of smells it, they're doing it a year early rather than a year late. Buffalo definitely didn't get better. And no matter what they do, if they trade for Ayuk, if they trade for Higgins, in totality, it's a net loss this offseason, which is tough to stomach if you're in Buffalo. And then Houston, again, we talked about our concerns with Stefon Diggs. So, again, to me, this is a meh trade where people act like, Texans are big winners, Buffalo's big losers. I just don't see it that way. I think neither team got some huge win here, whether it be Buffalo or Houston. Yeah, meh is all I really have.
I do think this is overall a good trade for the Texans, just because even if Diggs is declining a little bit, we know he still has the skill set, and maybe he struggled last year because he is declining a bit and there was nobody else there really to help him, right? Gabe Davis is not a true wide receiver too. I really like him as a deep threat, but he just doesn't open up things as much as a true wide receiver should, because he makes so many mistakes. Right. But now he's going to a team that's stacked. So it's going to be really, really hard to figure out for the Texans when you're playing them, who in the world do we focus on? Because normally defenses were putting all of their focus on Stefon Diggs at the end of last year. It's impossible for him to even get to the intermediate routes. Everything was so short for him because they're focusing on him. That can't happen now. Because like you brought up, you think Nico Collins is even better than Stefon Diggs' talent right now. I personally love Tank Dell. This kind of hurts my heart for fantasy, which we'll get to, because I love Tank Dell and I love him for fantasy. And Tank Dell, I think, showed last year he is going to be a special talent in this league. So if now you have Nico Collins, who's hard to cover, Tank Dell, who's just a beast coming into a second year, now Stefon Diggs is going to have all the space he needs to work. So I still think this is a good move for the Texans. Second round pick might be a little costly for me, but I don't mind the move for them.
Yeah, I guess overall, in the totality of things, you look at the whole roster. Yeah, they got more talent on the team, a better wide receiver than what they had. I guess just with some of the concerns, I don't think it's like the home run move that it's being positioned as online by everybody right now. But fair to say that the Texans did get better. It's just how much better for what they gave up it actually does. But Buffalo definitely in a tough place, and I get why Bills fans would be worried. This deal I'm not as concerned about, but when you look at their offseason as a whole, definitely a lot of questions, and it's fair to ask those. And I think that, shout out to Alex, who has been talking about the Buffalo downfall for quite some time now. I've been talking about Sean McDermott being on the hot seat, and if they're in this kind of transition and they don't, have a better year next year, I think that transition kind of completes itself with a new coach in 2025. But with that being said, we are going to move forward here. Big fantasy football news, not just NFL news with this trade. And, is Curtis Samuel going to get 200 targets next year? We're going to talk about that. Before we do, though, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to buy tickets. I buy all my tickets on Game Time. Been to baseball games, football games, basketball games, concerts, bought my tickets on Game Time because they have the best features of anyone in the business. They have killer last minute deals with their zone deals and their flash deals. They have all-in prices, which if you've ever bought tickets, they don't tell you the real price of the ticket when you go to buy it. So you get that at Game Time. They give you a view from your seat so you have an accurate idea of what you're going to be looking at when you sit down. And they have a lowest price guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. You're not going to get all of this at any other ticket website. So make sure that you take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Also want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, things I've never even heard of. They got it. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, Michelle, we've talked Texans. We've talked Bills. Now it's time to dive into your area of pure expertise. Now, I hate saying that, Michelle, because it makes it seem like, oh, fantasy football. That's, Michelle knows her regular football too, folks. Don't get me wrong here. Okay, obviously, we've been breaking it down, but she is our fantasy football expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network, so I would be remiss if I didn't leverage that knowledge. So coming out of the gate here, looking at where the pieces have fallen, what's your number one takeaway fantasy-wise and how this could impact the fantasy football situations?
I think we got to start with the quarterbacks, right? With Josh Allen has been the quarterback one for how many years now? For 3 years running. He's been absolutely elite and consistent. And that's why he's the top quarterback off the board, because he does have that extremely high ceiling and he rarely disappoints. Now, does that keep up without Stefon Diggs and without Gabe Davis? I brought up like all of his passing touchdowns goes to those two guys. So obviously we have the rest of the offseason. We'll see who they add as receivers, but that does make me a bit nervous. Now his rushing touchdowns will still be there. His rushing usage will still be there. So he's still going to be highly drafted, as he should be, but they need to add some receivers. With CJ Stroud though, how far does this push him up? Because last year he led the league in passing yards per game. And the only thing holding him back from being like an elite fantasy quarterback was the passing touchdowns. He had 23 passing touchdowns. He's a rookie. That's a very normal number. We can expect that to jump up next year, especially adding Stefon Diggs, having Tank Dell hopefully healthy for the whole season. I mean, consider last year for majority of the second half, it was Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz and not really anybody else, and he still got it done. And we did see a dip in fantasy production once Tank Dell was out. So adding Stefon Diggs back, his fantasy value has now increased. Now I'm still going Josh Allen. I'm still going Jalen Hurts as long as AJ Brown stays there, and Lamar Jackson. But now I think it gets close with Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes for fantasy. Right. Remember, for fantasy, don't freak out when I say Stroud and Mahomes in the same sentence. But then that also clearly puts him ahead of guys like Herbert and Jordan Love and Brock Purdy. Like, he is now a top 5 fantasy quarterback for me, probably 5. But I think with these weapons, I am going to be all in on CJ Stroud as long as his draft cost doesn't go insane here after this trade.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Will Levis. I mean, he's up there with those guys now. That was a joke, Michelle. We're not putting Will Levis in that category. Little joke. But yeah, I'm with you there. I think this pushes CJ Stroud up. What I will say on the other side of that is it pushes Stefon Diggs down. Now being in the offense with Nico Collins, with Tank Dell, I think it hurts those wide receivers. I think if you look at last year with San Francisco, you never know. Is it going to be Kittle? Is it going to be Ayuk? Is it going to be Deebo Samuel? Like, you never know. And I think when you get to a point where there's so many weapons on a team, it kind of pushes everybody's value down because you just don't know week to week who is going to be the guy. So I think that's something to worry about. But on the Buffalo side, I mean, I made the joke about Curtis Samuel. They're probably going to add a rookie. Maybe they make a trade, but as things stand right now, the only thing I see is Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid. So I think it definitely elevates him. Do you think I'm crazy?
No, you're definitely right, because last year, I mean, Kincaid was second on the team in targets by a good margin. It went
Yeah.
Diggs at the top by a gazillion. I mean,
Right.
he had
Right.
177 targets last year, including the playoffs. Kincaid was second at 102. So that's a
Ooh.
75 target difference. Then Gabe Davis at 81, and then James Cook at 63. Kincaid should see a massive bump in usage this year. He's going tight ends going from their rookie season the second year. That should already be a
Always.
jump right there. But I think he now enters the group of the Sam Laportas and the Trey McBrides, who are super excited for this year, and they're going to be drafted early. But Dalton Kincaid should now be there, because you're taking away so many targets. And I don't care if they bring in rookies. It's going to take some time for rookie wide receivers to get going, and they're not going to get 177 targets like Stefon Diggs did.
Right.
So I think Kincaid is used a ton, gets a ton of targets, and hopefully gets more touchdowns. He only had 3 touchdowns last year. He'll need more than that, but I definitely will have Kincaid ranked as probably my tight end 5, which he was a little bit lower than that prior to this trade. And then maybe James Cook. James Cook gets a lot more targets here. I don't think that's a good thing for this offense, because typically going through the running back in the passing game isn't super efficient for the team. I don't think that's great for Josh Allen's passing production or the team scoring production. But in terms of James Cook fantasy production, he should see a lot more targets as well.
100%. And I think, with Kincaid, the touchdowns will always be a little bit of a worry because of Josh Allen and running in the red zone and all of that. But absolutely, the target bump has to help him there. I think that even if they add a rookie wide receiver high, I think like a Xavier Worthy would be so good with Josh Allen's cannon. You get him running down the field past everybody with that 4.21 speed. Just let Allen air it out to him. I think that would be very helpful. But even if something like that happens, I'm with you. I still think Dalton Kincaid gets a huge bump, probably becomes their number 1 receiving target. Regardless of who gets brought in, because they're going to be a rookie wide receiver, unless they make the trade for Ayuk and we can reevaluate. But yeah, 100% big bump for Dalton Kincaid. I think it pushes Stefon Diggs down quite a bit more than we're used to. And CJ Stroud gets a good bump because he's just got more talent around. And I would say, even you look back to last year, Nico Collins, even like the Titans game in week 15, Nico Collins wasn't even in that game. It was like Noah Brown and Robert Woods as their top 2 wide receivers, and Stroud was still putting up Stroud didn't play in that game, but all of the issues that they had at wide receiver, he's still producing. Now they'll at least have more depth, even if somebody gets hurt. Like, can you count on Tank Dell to stay healthy? So I think that all makes a lot of sense. Any other takeaways that you had?
Yeah, this is a big takeaway I have right here. So now there's 3 really, really good quarterbacks that are going to get guys the ball and going to be good for fantasy that do not have any wide receivers right now. It's Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, and Justin Herbert. Now, we know they're going to figure out a way to get it done, and they're going to make some guy relevant as a wide receiver.
Right.
I think there's going to be a lot of rookie wide receivers this year that are going to be highly impactful fantasy assets immediately, because there's so many situations that they can go into where they are going to be needed immediately. It's not like you could bring them in slowly. I'm not going to say it's going to be super efficient for all these guys. They might still have, they have to still have that learning curve, but this could be a very unusual rookie wide receiver class that they just have to see a lot of targets this year because they're necessary.
100%. And one thing I will say, another shout out to Alex. Alex talks a lot about how the wide receiver position and the value of wide receivers is changing, how we're seeing number 1 expensive wide receivers. Wide receiver may be the most pro-ready position coming out of the draft nowadays, and there seems to be every year, like since 2014, like every year, there's a ton of good wide receivers, except last year. That was kind of a down wide receiver class, but it seems like every year there's a ton of good wide receivers who are ready to play right away. Will that change the wide receiver market a little bit to where teams aren't willing to pay as much for receivers and teams are more willing to trade these wide receivers when they get off their rookie contracts? Not saying it's going to turn into running back, but just saying supply and demand is a real thing. And the supply of good wide receivers is so high right now that the demand may go down. And how that impacts the fantasy community is just something to watch as well in that layered conversation. But with all that being said, great episode, great insight. Michelle, thank you so much. Make sure you check out Michelle's work. Locked On Fantasy Football, does stuff for the NFL Network as well. Superstar over there. Obviously, I'm over at Locked On Titans. Make sure that you guys check us out on Twitter at Tic Tac Titans for me, at Ball Blastum for Michelle. But that is going to do it for us today on a Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. As I say every week, start your weekend early and stay safe out there.